And because we strongly believe that it has to be in every corner of the organization, we also made a mandatory upskilling program for all our employees worldwide, and in the Netherlands with even a more deep diver session. So just to kick off.
No, wonderful. Thank you so much for that. And Walaa, I'm going to turn to you and ask you, from the perspective of Egypt, what are the ESG priorities here locally in the country? And how does UN Global Compact Egypt Network support companies in terms of demonstrating progress towards these ESG goals?
Okay, nowadays, as you know, ESG have been everywhere and have been scaling up in every space. And the Egyptian regulation imposes ESG in everything now. You see, like the listing rules includes that companies should report on their ESG reporting. And as we see from the last session, that the Central Bank of Egypt is putting regulations on green financing. So it's everywhere. What we do as Global Compact, we mainly tackle the needs of the business sector to deal with the ESG reporting and ESG practices. We provide what the business sector needs in terms of capacity building, awareness. We do policy advocacy. Private sector in Egypt needs a policy advocacy and needs someone to engage and connect all the parties, the government, the financial institutions, the management consultant, all the agencies in the ecosystem. We are working to make a collective impact, because individually we will do lots of things, but we will not have this very powerful impact when we work all together. So we are trying to be the umbrella where we bring all the private sector and all other agencies in the right ecosystem to upscale the private sector, doing more and more towards ESG.
So you mentioned, taking action, making progress. So James, I want to ask you, KenGen was recently a participant in our early adopters program for our enhanced communication on progress. And of course, the enhanced communication on progress is the UN Global Compact's reporting platform. So here at the UN Global Compact, we're really asking companies to demonstrate progress year over year. Can you tell us a little bit about, what is KenGen's approach to reporting, and what role does it play in terms of having companies really have a strong form of action in terms of staying accountable to the targets that they're setting?
Thank you, Megan, and I'm glad to be part of this panel. Yes, KenGen has been a participant member for the last 3 years, and we are the leading electricity generating company in Kenya. One of the objectives of our company is to be the leading electricity generator, not only in terms of green energy, but also being an enabler in terms of the business within the country. So within the last 2 years, we've been reporting through our COP, and the early adopters program has enabled us to streamline the reporting so that we don't have to miss any of the 10 UN global principles in terms of the reporting. It gives us an opportunity to be able to follow through in terms of our commitments that we made last year. What is the status now, and how are we going to ensure that we continually improve in terms of the commitments that we've made. So yes, it has enabled us to be systematic in our reporting. The format is easier now, and we look forward to adopting it even in the future reporting. Thank you.
Thank you, James. If you want to pass the microphone down to Shargil, I want to circle back on one of the topics that Wineke mentioned, which is, of course, climate ambition. So Shargil, I want to ask you about the Climate Ambition Accelerator, which is one of our intensive programs here at the UN Global Compact. You recently participated in this. One of the objectives is to support companies in understanding the science-based targets, which Wineke had mentioned. Can you speak to us a little bit about your experience and how this has really supported First Abu Dhabi Bank in terms of bringing alive your sustainability strategy when it comes to climate ambition?
I think, first of all, it's extremely important to remember that being the biggest bank in the UAE and in the region, it's extremely important for us to address climate change. It's important because we know that the region is going to be one of the regions that's going to be hit the hardest by the climate challenges. So we don't have an option not to address these challenges. And a lot of this is also about capacity building. So last year we introduced our ESG strategy, which addresses, of course, the E, S, and G from different aspects. We set ourselves short, medium, and long-term targets for all those three key pillars in the organization. And a key part of that to roll out that strategy was about capacity building. And in heart of our commitment under E sits becoming net zero. So we were the first bank in 2021 who joined the Net Zero Banking Alliance from the GCC, where we made a commitment that we want to become net zero from our scope 1 and 2 by 2030, but also scope 3 by 2050, which is basically our financed emissions, which is a challenging as we don't have a lot of data and background of the understanding of scope 3 in this region at this point. So I think the capacity building and get the understanding of the journey has been extremely important. I think that's where the work of the UN Global Compact has been important for us to get that understanding. And also the other frameworks within UN, whether it's the Net Zero Banking Alliance or is the PRB, has been extremely important to get the understanding of the frameworks. So you're working from a unified direction. You have something you can apply within your organization. You can set a clear direction, and you can aim to achieve those targets, which has been extremely important for us.
Thank you, and congratulations on the commitments that you've made. James, circling back to you, so in terms of KenGen, I'm going to actually read my notes because in just 3 years since joining the UN Global Compact, like First Abu Dhabi Bank, you've participated in the Climate Ambition Accelerator. You've also signed on to the Business Ambition for 1.5 Degrees campaign. You've completed as well, or no, rather you've committed to science-based targets. How has being a UN Global Compact participant enhanced your climate action strategy? And can you tell us a bit about your ambitions for the future?
Yeah, thank you, Meghan. Once again, we are grateful for the support and engagements that we've had with the UN Global Compact. We've been able to benefit from a number of capacity building initiatives, like you mentioned, the Climate Accelerator program that we've been able to participate in. We've also been able to have the Target Gender Equality program, and we've had those kind of trainings being offered to us through that partnership, and many other training programs that are available online, and the company has really benefited, and we've seen a lot of enthusiasm from the employees in participating in these capacity building programs. In terms of going forward, like you've rightly said, we've committed to setting the science-based targets, and that commitment means that within the 24 hours from our 24 months from our commitment, we are supposed to conclude, and we are in the process. We've already done the baseline analysis, so now we are in the process of rolling out the engagement with the various stakeholders within the company to be able to set those targets, and we are committed through the leadership of the company to set those science-based targets. So yes, the UN Global Compact has enabled us. You can see within 3 years we've really moved fast, but it's all about the leadership and the commitment from the top. And of course, again, with those capacity building, you can only move forward. Thank you.
Wineke, turning back to you. So you set the stage for us today in terms of what ESG really means in action. PwC Netherlands and EMEA has been a SDG Pioneer runner-up for the Netherlands 2 years, 2019 and 2022. So you're obviously innovating. This is a focus for you. Can you tell us a little bit about what innovation looks like for PwC when it comes to sustainability?
Yes, of course, happy to. And I was very honored to be the SDG Pioneer. So if you look at the system and the economic system, I think one of the conclusions we all make here already today and for a few years is that the system is broken, right? So the system needs to be rethought, And so for me, you know, sustainability is innovation. You need to make new connections because the connections are broken, the connections between organizations and nature, connection between organizations and inequality, but also very often, you know, humanity, the connection with the heart is broken. So there are so many, you know, so we need to connect the dots, and with that you need to think from an innovative point of view and come up with new solutions. So I would like to give 3 examples, if I may, but you can stop me after the first one if you're getting bored. So the first one, where we became SDG Pioneer Runner-Up, was the start. We wanted to get to know, you know, the SDGs broadly in the organization, so not only in the sustainability department. And I had the privilege to be in Singularity University in San Francisco, and with a lot around emerging technology. And I remember that there was someone who told me that if you put VR goggles onto someone who is heavily burned, and you let this person in the VR goggle go through ice landscape, they feel the highest pain relief, even higher than many medicines. And when I heard that story, I thought, wow, so VR can actually touch people in the heart differently than we do very often, intellectual, right, in the private businesses. So I remember I called my team and I said, okay, so we are going to have an e-learning, a training, etc., intellectual thing around the SDGs, but for sure we're going to bring in innovation. We're going to make a VR experience in a dome and let people experience what's going on in the world. Because if you look at the world, there are mainly behind the 17 SDGs, there are 3 biggest problems, right? The loss of biodiversity, the climate crisis, and the increased inequality. So how do you make people aware of that topic? So we made a dome, and people went in individually with a VR experience, and then an immersive experience with a game on the SDGs. And it was supposed to be open for 2 weeks in our own office, and eventually it was, I think, eventually 20,000 people saw it, even up to the lobby of the United Nations headquarters, which was still a highlight of my career, of course. But the fact why it was so successful is because we just touched people in the heart. People were almost crying when they saw the things happening in the VR experience. So it was maybe not so much an innovation, but it was an innovation, but a creative way of engaging people. Because I think very often if we talk about the SDGs, a lot of it is also technical possible, but it's the behavioral change. It's the people who need to change their behavior. So how do we get people engaged? So that was for one of the innovations. The other one was in aviation, because if you look at the SBTI target for PwC, the biggest contributor in scope 3 is aviation, is our mobility, our travel. And I was thinking, okay, so when we set that goal, you can either fly or you cannot fly, right? So there's not a lot in between. But I thought that can't be true. The aviation sector is only over 100 years old. We need to innovate the sector. So although I was not in the sector, I became, I don't know, interested and passionate about it. So I was dialing around, and everyone thought I was crazy, because I was saying we need to find a way where aviation becomes positive, nature positive. So how can we do that? We are far from it, but we took some steps. So what not a lot of people know, what we did then was we donated the first fully electric plane, and we donated and gave that to the Dutch Aviation Center, just to really push the innovation in the sector, because very often what we need is system change. It's not only an individual action of your own organization, but it's really where are your suppliers, where are you involved in your upstream, downstream, and then move forward together. So by this push, which was a surprise in the market, people thought, why is PwC buying a fully electric plane and donate that? People thought, why do you care? And we said, well, because it's our scope 3. And then we decided to heavily be involved in the sustainable aviation fuels. We were the first who bought biofuels, and we made recently the commitment that we only fly on sustainable aviation fuels from 2022 as PwC the Netherlands. And with all those innovations, we are now leading also, together with 20-30 of our big organizations in the Netherlands, fly differently. And people now come up with all kind of innovations because they get inspired. So, and then the third, I will keep it a bit shorter, but the third example of an innovation, why we got the prize last year, is biodiversity. I think for me it always works like this. I look outside and I think, okay, so what are the biggest waves coming from nature, from society, and approaching us next to the most material SDGs for your own organization? And one of them is, of course, biodiversity. And biodiversity, I was in Davos talking to the CEO of the WWF, and he told me, we don't, I mean, if you look at the climate crisis, we reduced it now to CO2. But CO2 is not the climate crisis, but of course it's a big contributor, but you have more emissions, etc. But in biodiversity, you don't really have that. We cannot really grasp biodiversity, and we cannot connect the dots between the organizational activities and biodiversity. So I was thinking, okay, so you have this big theme, biodiversity. What can PwC do as an innovation to contribute to that big problem? So we came up with, okay, hopefully what we can do well is to come up with methodology, with measurement, with reporting tools. So we have now created last year a biodiversity impact tool, where you can actually measure your impact on biodiversity as an organization. And then we are always our own pilot first. So we implement it first for our own organization, and then we bring it to the market, to our clients. So these are three examples. I think it's one of the things which excites me from my job the most, the innovation part, because it's finding new ways where it contributes to your bottom line and contributes to nature and to people. And it's super exciting to find the sweet spot. Yeah.
Some of the key phrases that I pulled out from your answer there were finding new ways, connecting, engaging, problem solving for what's broken. Well, we're here in Egypt for COP27. So from your perspective, what would you like to see come out of the Egypt COP, the Africa COP, when we think about sustainable business here in Egypt and then Africa more broadly?
Okay, first of all, before answering this question, I want to go back to the first question, and I want to make a point clear that the Global Compact laid the foundation of the ESG. We are embarking on 4 main pillars and 10 main principles. We are talking environment, labor, anti-corruption, and human rights. So, and we are encouraging and helping companies to report on all of this. So ESG is a Global Compact main foundation. So back to your questions for COP27. I believe I wish to see like an inclusive strategy for the private sector, inclusive of all marginalized group, more lenient regulation, especially for Egypt, because the regulatory system and the ecosystem for the private sector, we are asking the private sector to go more for sustainability, but we don't know that this comes on the expense of the operations of the private sector and the profit of the private sector, and especially SMEs. We are asking, SMEs are a different player. They need a different and a specific strategy, and they are the main driver of the economy. And they need more incentives to go more for sustainability. And I believe this is the case for Africa as well. It's not Egypt. So what I dream of seeing coming out of COP is more lenient regulation and inclusive strategy that really empowers the private sector. And maybe a more powerful role for international organizations, maybe a more collaboration, a more mapping for the need of the private sector, a more getting together for international organizations themselves to see how they can really help more to have a collective impact, a real collective impact.
Thank you, Walaa. Shargil, looking towards the future, COP28 will be hosted in Dubai in the UAE. Thinking between now and a year from now, what role do you see the private sector in UAE, in the Middle East, playing in terms of accelerating and scaling impact in the lead up to COP28?
I think towards COP28, but overall, the private sector is key to address the climate challenges. I think whether it's going to be for COP28 or COP27, partnerships between the private and the public sector are crucial. Otherwise, we are not able to address the climate change challenges we have. I do hope and I do expect that on the road to COP28, we will see more actions and trying to move from the commitments we have seen for the past couple of years to concrete actions. There are 3 concrete things we can collaborate on. So we know that we need a lot of financing to address the climate change challenges, and I think that's an area where we can see the public and private sector collaborate. Innovation, as it was mentioned, is going to be critical because we need other solutions to address the climate change challenges. That's another area that partnerships are going to be extremely important. And I think that the final part, which people often underestimate, is going to be the human capital. In order to get to net zero by 2050, human capital is going to be critical because you cannot succeed with the financing, you cannot succeed with innovation without the human capital. So we need to collaborate on that, whether it's capacity building, something that UN Global Compact does fantastically well, or other important teams. Human capital is going to be extremely important. So I think that those are the obvious areas that we need to collaborate on. We need to have better partnerships. And in order to move from commitments to actions, we will need to focus on partnerships. Otherwise, I'm afraid that we will be sitting at COP28, COP29, and still discussing commitments and not actions. So I do not see a future, I don't see a net zero without collaboration and without partnerships.
Thinking about collaboration, partnerships, taking action, final question for all of our panelists today, and I think we can start with you since you have the microphone, and we'll pass it down. We know that we are not on track to meet the Sustainable Development Goals. We're about 62 years behind on the Social Progress Index. In one word, what would you say to businesses about the need to take ambitious action now to achieve the SDGs?
I will say that you need to, in case to have a future business model, you need to act now. If you don't act now, your business is at risk, right? I think it's as simple as that. If you don't act now on setting your decarbonization strategy, your climate agenda, I'm not sure that you will have a business in 5 to 10 years. As simple as that.
I think in line with that, I very often say we are all B to S. So if you look at the economy books, they talk about B2B, business to business, business to consumer, but we're all business to society. And I think when I started my journey in sustainability in the corporate world was about almost 20 years ago. I become a dino here, but then there was a reason to go in because the climate crisis was already going on and coming. But now in 2022. You not only have that the problems are super, super urgent, but you have the regulation coming up, you have the stakeholder engagement coming up, you have young people who really demand it luckily from our organization. And so you don't have any escape. If you want to have value, you cannot deny the ESGs, you cannot deny, so you need to step up because otherwise your value will be at risk and your business will be at risk. Not even talking about the fact that if we don't have a healthy world, we cannot have healthy business, not have healthy people at all. So, you better go. You don't have any escape nowadays. Yeah.
I believe everyone would agree on the same thing, and I would add that traditional operational KPIs will not be any more able to sustain the business. Sustainability practices, KPIs, are going to do so. So businesses need to think from this aspect.
Yeah, from my part, in addition to what has been said, I want to give a scenario where in our country now we are facing the worst drought in the last 40 years. And if businesses to make an impact, they say action speaks louder than words. So the time for action is now, and say action speaks louder than words. So the time for action is now, and if we had done this probably 40 years ago, we'll be having a better response to these kind of emergencies. So the climate challenge is real, and therefore there's need for real action, and action speaks louder than words. Thank you.
Thank you all very much for generously sharing your insights with us today. You've left us with some inspiration, some important topics to think about as we experience the next 2 weeks here at COP27, and we look beyond to taking action, accelerating and scaling impact. So that includes our panel for this afternoon. We're going to end right on time here today, but I do want to thank you all very much for your time.